Alright, hello everybody. How are we all doing today? Well, tonight. At least on the East Coast it is tonight, 8 o'clock here. Going live a little bit earlier than I normally do. It is just because we're going to be busy later tonight. And because I know we have a pretty juicy passage. That is right, we are starting the Sermon on the Mount today. So we have the Beatitudes, which will be fun to talk about and discuss. Those are some verses that I've always liked in the past, and they've always kind of stuck with me, and ones that I think there are just a lot of interesting things to talk about. We'll probably get started, like, reading and stuff, and a minute or two. A few technical things I gotta do on my end first before we get going. So while we wait, this is kind of a good time for me to, do my usual spiel. In this series, we're going through the entire, in theory, the entire Bible. Kind of section by section, sentence by sentence, usually even. We started in Matthew just because I thought Genesis would be a little complicated. I didn't want to begin there right off the gate. We'll get to Genesis at some point, but we'll probably go through most of, if not the entire New Testament first, before hopping back over to the Old Testament. And we are now on chapter 5 today. I am not an expert. I honestly, to a large degree, this is all about us me especially, trying to figure out what we think about certain passages and believe about certain passages. So I do not have answers for all of these things. I probably will get some things wrong, and this whole section is about interpreting the more nebulous parts of the Bible. Nebulous as in they could be interpreted multiple different ways, and people could take them and apply them to their lives in different ways. Right. If you enjoy words, you're also in the right place, because I do talk about that every now and then. Grammar. I love grammar. I love the way grammar works in storytelling. It's not fiction, but it's like fiction. So, I was gonna say in fiction, but of course, the Bible isn't fiction. Whatever, you get what I mean. In stories, I really enjoy the use of grammar and things like that to draw the reader's attention to certain details, to explain things without having to go into detail. That's one of the things I love. That's a large part of why I wanted to start this channel. That is why I do want to do something similar to this, something at least, with other fictional works, like probably something fantasy or historical fiction, just because I really like going through and seeing exactly why the author used these particular words and this word choice and the sentence structure, and I like going through and seeing how in a fantasy world, the way the world comes together, the way the characters interact with the world, the way the world interacts with the plot, and the way the characters interact with the plot, it all comes together. That's kind of the core triangle of what makes stories. The Bible has all of that too, of course, but there's a lot. For one thing, the Bible is written in a different language, so you can't always focus on exact word choice and structure of sentences, because it's not the same as what I'm reading, because that's not what it was actually written in. For another thing, the Bible is not a fictional work. right? Or that, and so that makes it more like a biography than anything else, right? Especially the Gospels. And there were also just writing premises, I guess you could say, writing tools that they used differently back then than the way they do now. And yeah. And the Bible just has a lot more deep philosophical sort of topics to talk about that we focus on more so than this makes a good story, because that's not what the focus of the Bible is. So all that to say, I will at some point want to do something else on the channel as well. I wanted to do Lord of the Rings. I still might do Lord of the Rings, but I think in this style, with this amount of viewers, and at my learning level or whatever, it just didn't really work, because most of what I would be saying is just things that I've heard from other people, because I do consume a lot of Lord of the Rings content. So I thought about doing first time reads. I still might do that. I thought about doing video essays. I still might do that. But there's just other things I'm working on right now, and this podcast has been kind of a good starting point, so I think we'll stick with that for a good bit. I would say until the next couple months, probably stick with just this. Okay. Hello. Everybody. We will get started. Sorry. Okay, so this is chapter 5. Yes, that is a big block of text right there. Normally it would not be formatted as such, but I needed to fit all the Beatitudes on one slide because I didn't want to have to keep flipping back and forth between two. So, yeah, we get this giant, intimidating thing. When he saw the crowds... Okay, actually, backtrack. We need to look at where we were. This happens every single week, by the way. We were just talking about how Jesus was going all over Galilee and teaching and preaching and healing people, right? And how there were large crowds, primarily because he was healing people, because, who doesn't want to be healed? And it was people from all around the surrounding area, right? When he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, "The poor in spirit are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Those who mourn are blessed, because they will be comforted. The gentle are blessed, for they will inherit the earth. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be filled. The merciful are blessed, for they will be shown mercy. The pure in heart are blessed, for they will see God. The peacemakers are blessed, for they will be called sons of God. Those who are persecuted for righteousness are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. You are blessed when they insult and persecute you, and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven, for that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Okay. Sorry. After reading all that, my voice is a little dry. Okay, so there we go. The beginning of what would be dubbed by us English translators at a much later date, the the Sermon on the Mount. I don't know where my tongue is running all over the place today. So this begins with Jesus seeing all the crowds, When he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. What this is describing is a scene where you're imagining a large crowd of people kind of slowly build around Jesus. And so that the people can hear him and have a place to, like, sit down, right? He goes up onto the mountain. So he's going up to a higher place so that his voice can carry more, right? That's one thing. So that people can see him, potentially, maybe. So that's another reason. And just that way he's not, you don't want it to become a mob where he's just, like, surrounded by tons of people and he can't even walk anywhere, and he's able to kind of stand up, similar to the way, somebody might stand up on a really big stage. Similar ideas here. He went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, which is interesting because we almost never imagine Jesus or, like, anybody as sitting down when they are speaking before a crowd. I think a lot of that is because of the modern devices of think about this. Like when a pastor is giving a sermon, why are they standing up? It is usually because, one, they have a microphone that potentially is up higher, right? And so they don't have to hold the microphone, so it's on a stand. Two, that way people can see them. Jesus is probably far enough away from most people in the crowd that they can't even see him anyways. Three, and besides, that's not that important. Three, it's so that, like if you have a pulpit or something, right, and you need to be reading while you're giving your message, right, or you're going off of something that you're holding up, instead of, if you were just sitting down, you would either have to have a table right in front of you, or you'd have to be holding all that stuff in your arms. So I think, I would say, yeah, that all of those things kind of go into why I think we always see people as standing up when they're giving a message. I think the biggest one is probably that way their voice can carry, and that way they will be, up high. But of course, Jesus is already on top of a mountain. I mean, not on top of it, maybe, but up on a mountain. So he doesn't need to worry about that. His disciples came to him, which I find a little interesting. I'm not exactly sure who it means by the disciples, his disciples. I am assuming it is the 12 disciples and whatever, other close followers he has potentially around him. I guess my question is, why weren't they next to him from the get-go? Like, where were they? Right? Like, I don't know. He's in a crowd, he goes up on the mountain, he sits down, and then his disciples come to him. Like, where were they before that? I don't know. Seems like an odd detail, and I can't really figure out exactly what the meaning of it is. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little odd. The really interesting thing is that the if you were to write this in modern English, like in a modern story, the them in that next sentence, then he began to teach them, I would definitely assume that the them is referring to his disciples, not crowds. Okay? And maybe it is. That doesn't really make sense, though, because I don't know. Right, like the structure of these sentences definitely make it sound like the them is his disciples, right? He went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, right? That is. So is his there's three options I see. The first is that his disciples is supposed to just mean like a much larger group of people than I'm thinking, like much larger group of people than 12. Like the first option is that his disciples is like actually like 700 people, right? Like, and it's just all the people who have said that they're gonna follow Jesus, right? Or just Or it's even being more vague than that. It's just all the people in the crowd are his disciples in this instance. I kind of doubt that, though, because usually the word disciples is restricted. It's used most typically to refer to the 12 disciples and like maybe a few other people too. And I think there's that one passage that says his disciples went up to, was it 500? Maybe? Is that right? Or was it 700? There's a few different times it happened, and I know one of them was either 70 or 50, and one of them was either 500 or 700. Maybe let's see if I can look this up and actually get an answer. Okay, yes. Okay, yes, the wider group of 70. Yes, okay. So, you know, not an in-depth research there, but just quick Googling. I think I was right, it was 70. So, yeah, the word disciples usually isn't used for like a much larger group than that. So I don't think disciples could be meaning this huge crowd of like hundreds of people. So the first option is that disciples is referring to a larger group of people than I think, and I think that's the least likely. The second option would be that he is actually teaching his disciples, like his close group of 12 to 70 people, and that's who he's mostly teaching, right? And it's kind of like he's also letting the crowd hear too, you know, but like this is really him teaching his disciples, and maybe it's even a situation where it's like he's telling his disciples and then he wants them to go spread it to the crowd like later or something, or have them like relay it down the crowd, right? I could see that potentially as well. The whole idea of him like having people relay the message down the crowd, that was something they did in The Chosen, actually, I remember. And I remember when it happened, I feel like it's something that the Bible did mention, but I'm not sure of that. So, don't quote me on it. But I think it's brought up in the Bible at some point. Or, like, it just feels right. I don't know. Oh, sorry. Let me go get that. Alright, sorry. I'm back. Totally forgot I don't know why I set my alarm to 8:20. Anyways. So that's the second option, is that he is primarily teaching the disciples. The reason I don't like that one very much either is because, I mean, in tradition, this is called the Sermon on the Mount. And the idea that, like, this tradition has been wrong for hundreds of years, that it wasn't actually a sermon, this was him just, like, teaching his close disciples, right? Because he does do that, right? We see a lot of the time, even when he's talking to crowds, like, he'll then afterward turn to the side and be like, they'll be like, oh, what was that supposed to mean? And he'll give them, like, a private little lesson, you know? So the idea that that sort of thing is what this whole speech actually is, it just goes against so much common tradition, and it also kind of goes off, like, common sense, I guess. Like, if you have this huge crowd here and you went on top of the mountain, why are you now going to just avoid them? I don't know. That just doesn't make any sense. And the message that he gives also feels to me more like a sermon than a private lesson, right? It follows more so the path of Jesus' large-scale messages, right? Where he's just kind of giving... I don't know how to say this. Most of the things he says are things that kind of are calling out the Jewish people as a whole, and less so calling out like his disciples specifically, or like relating to his disciples specifically, if that makes sense. Usually when he's talking to just his disciples, it's either about something very, very like deep that most people wouldn't understand. About the Holy Spirit, that's the second thing. It's either something very deep, it's either about the Holy Spirit and his second coming, or it's about explaining a parable. Like 90% of the time, it's one of those three things. The Sermon on the Mount is not any of those things, really. It feels more like a sermon. Especially the way that he calls out the Pharisees. Very reminiscent of what he does a lot of times in John, the book of John, and what John the Baptist, the other John, did as well, right? So then the third option, I guess the third option you could say is that it was some sort of relay thing, right? And I guess that would make sense given what we read here. Like, it kind of works. But the fourth option, or third really, is that the them is actually referring to the crowds and not the disciples. Or it's sort of just like a vague them in general. Like, it's not really talking about either groups. It's just like, then he began to teach people. Like, and it's just, we just translated it as them because it's just like a ambiguous people, you know. I think that one's probably the most likely. But, you know, my grammar and author mind just doesn't want to accept that because it's just bad writing, to be honest. Like, them always refers to the most recent noun, you know, like you can't do that. But anyways, I don't know. In the end, it is pretty much a moot point. I think this message was a sermon and not a private discussion. I think that's all that's important to know. Exactly who the them is referring to and how this whole thing worked doesn't really matter that much. So, let's move on. Saying, the poor in spirit are blessed. By the way, can you pronounce blessed? The poor in spirit are blessed. See, like, if it was the other translation, I would definitely say, blessed are the poor in spirit. But I don't know. It sounds wrong when I say the poor in spirit are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. I don't know. I'm thinking that's like an archaic or British pronunciation. I like it more because blessed is actually kind of hard to say. But anyways, the poor in spirit are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Okay, what are we talking about here? Because that sentence does not seem to make any sense whatsoever if you just look at it, just a quick check, and you're not paying attention to the specific words used, and more importantly, what those words like older or alternative meanings are. This sentence seems to really not be making sense at first. Right, the poor in spirit are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. What that seems to be saying at first is like, who are the poor in spirit? I think your first assumption would be the poor in spirit are like the people that don't care about their religion, who have horrible spirits, I guess, is what you'd be saying, right? Like, the people who just have no conscience, who just don't even care, who do horrible things, and then it's like, oh yeah, the kingdom of heaven is theirs, and you're like, what? Excuse me? What? That's not what he's saying. What is he talking about? And let's check the Greek to see if it does translate those differently, because that would be interesting. No, it's still blessed are the poor in spirit. Okay, so the same. My assumption, the reading, like, what he's trying to say is the poor in spirit. I would rephrase that as the downcast and lowly. right? Who are the poor in spirit? I would say the poor in spirit are the downcast, the lowly, the people who have grief and troubles, who are... Yeah, that's what the word blessed is, yep. Yeah, the word blessed, I think that's a good definition. Made happy by God, fortunate. I think that's a good definition. We can think about that one a little more if we need to. But I want to look at the first part, the poor in spirit, because I think it's a very interesting phrase. I don't think it's really used ever again that I can think of. And it's a sort of phrase that, as I said, if you just read it blank on paper, the poor in spirit are blessed, sounds like the people who don't do good things and don't care about their spiritual life and don't have a good conscience, those people are blessed. That's what it's sort of sounding like at first. I don't think that's what it means. As I said, I think the poor in spirit, I would say those, as I said, are the lowly, the downcast. What else can that be meaning? What else? The poor in spirit. Is this an instance? See, I'm surprised my Greek did translate that as the same thing. Because I was wondering if this would be an instance where we translated it poor, and really it was more like the meek in spirit or something like that. Or the humble in spirit, or even the lowly in spirit. But the poor in spirit, there's a lot of different ways we use the word spirit in English. We use it to mean, I would say, three main things. One is your demeanor and attitude, if that makes sense. So like high spirits, like you're feeling good, So if it's that kind of spirit, then the poor in spirit is like the depressed, like the people who aren't having a good time, the people who are kind of down on themselves. Those people are blessed. If it's the second kind of spirit, as in the second kind of spirit, I think we use spirit to mean like energetic, maybe not energetic, courageous, wild, not really, like gets things done. Like that's a spirited horse, right? When we say that about a horse, we're talking about this is a horse that, has a lot of energy, has a lot of spirit to them, they're feisty, they're passionate. Passion would be, I think, the synonym for that type of spirit, right? So the poor in spirit in that sense are those who are kind of sorry, some people just got home, so I got distracted for a second. The poor in spirit in that sense would be the quiet, sort of the the meek, I think, kind of works, right? The humble, the people who keep themselves in rein, the people who don't let their emotions take control of them, right? But also the people who maybe kind of are cautious to the point of maybe being too cautious, right? The people who are fearful, maybe. And that actually could make sense, because I can think of quite a few biblical characters who are like that. And that sort of... some of those qualities are biblical qualities. I think like self-control especially. But I don't know. And then the last spirit, the last way we use spirit is like your soul, right? Your inner being, or what have you, as well as the Holy Spirit, of course, which those are connected but not the same. Yeah, I don't know. The reading I thought of off the gate, and I think the one I've always assumed, was that it's sort of the first sort of spirit, as in your, like, mood and demeanor. So the poor in spirit are the lowly, the depressed, the ones who are down on themselves, who, you know, those are the people who will be blessed. That just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, let's pull out the commentary I've been reading through, see if it has anything to say on this. I did not have a chance to completely read through it all before getting to this one. It's been pretty helpful. Okay, so okay, I think I like the reading proffered here in this commentary, which I guess, you know, shout out to the Wiersbe Bible Commentary. That's one of the resources I've been using. It says, the poor in spirit means to be humble, to have a correct estimate of oneself. It does not mean to be poor-spirited and have no backbone at all. Poor in spirit is the opposite of the world's attitudes of self-praise and self-assertion. It is not a false humility that says, I am not worth anything, I can't do anything. It is instead honesty with ourselves. We know ourselves, accept ourselves, and try to be ourselves to the glory of God. I think that is a pretty good definition, and that makes sense. That follows one of the three definitions of spirit I was saying. The second one, right? The idea of spirit as in, you know, passion to a degree, right? You know, that sort of use of like a spirited animal, right? Like, and it is those positive attributes I was saying I could see there, right? Someone who's poor in spirit could mean somebody who's humble, someone who has self-control, and those sort of things. Yes, that makes sense. It lists Romans 12:3 as a second example of this. I am going to go check that out, because I do still want more context on this, the word here. Romans 12:3. So, I will tell you all now, by the way, we are definitely not going to be getting through all the Beatitudes today. For by the grace given to me, I tell everyone among you not to think of themselves more highly than he should. Instead, think sensibly as God has distributed a measure of faith to each one. Okay, so not much help on the use of poor in spirit, but just more talking about being humble. I'm gathering that this is one of those things where it kind of makes sense in my head. Like, I get what that meaning is trying to say, right? The poor in spirit. I don't like the translation poor. I don't know if that is the correct translation, because I just find that hard to believe that that's actually what it says. My guess is that it probably means something more along the lines of like the meek in spirit, or the lowly in spirit, or potentially even the humble in spirit, right? It literally could just mean the humble in spirit. And I wonder if this is an instance of where, because humble and poor are two words that kind of get connected in our English sometimes. I'm wondering if this is an instance where it's translated incorrectly in the Greek side. Even with this Greek interlinear New Testament, like, we don't always know what these words were supposed to mean exactly. So, or they could have multiple meanings, or the fine definitions of certain meanings can be lost, you know. Because I would say humbleness is being poor in spirit to a degree. It is being humble, or having a correct estimate of oneself, is knowing that you are poor in spirit and accepting that and acting as if you were poor in spirit instead of trying to pretend to be something more, right? Or you could also phrase it willingly making yourself poor in spirit, right? This reminds me, we were talking about humility actually in a youth group not too long ago. This reminds me of there's a verse in Proverbs. It's something along the lines of pride will lead to humiliation, and humility leads to honor, right? And Jesus paraphrases this quite well. All those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And I think that's the same point that this is getting at, right? It's not the people who it's not the people who are poor-spirited or have no backbone. It's the people who humble themselves, right? Who accept that they have a poor spirit, or who humble their spirit, who are blessed, right? Those who will be humbled are exalted, right? So that makes sense. I'm either assuming this is a phrase that is supposed to make more sense than it does to me, or like is a phrase that would make more sense to the Jewish people than it does to me, or that this is a wrong translation, because I don't see the connection directly with being poor in spirit and being humble. Like, those aren't the same thing to me. But yeah, because to me, being poor in spirit would be somebody who lacks motivation, who lacks passion, who lacks, yes, pride, but like in the bad sort of way, like lacks confidence, like the sort of person who just doesn't get anything done because they're always down on themselves, right? And humility is like similar, but the opposite, where it's the exact opposite in a sense, right? It's somebody who is confident in themselves, but isn't proud about it, like isn't haughty about it, and isn't less so confident even in themselves and more so confident in their state with God, if that makes sense. So I guess I can see it. Like, it's a very fine line. I don't know. And as I said, like, the translation would not even have to change, like, barely any for this to make total sense to me. It might just be a me thing where I'm reading poor in spirit a different way than most people would. Because as humble and poor, like, you can say he was a humble man and mean, you know, he didn't have that much money, but he got by with what he had. I don't know if you can mean I don't know if you can say a poor person and mean, oh yeah, they were humble. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it goes both ways, but maybe it does, and this is just a me thing. Anyways, let's move on to verse 4. Actually, before we do that, I was intrigued by the name Beatitudes. I knew some of the history behind it, but just wanted to talk about it for a minute. That's a name we've come up with, the English people, much well after this was all written and spoken, sometime around the 15th century. And the Beatitudes, it's the Greek word beatus or beati, meaning blessed or blessed are, right? And then the suffix tude, you see that in like gratitude, or let me think of a better example. Magnitude is a decent one. Let me still find if I can find a better example of that to explain what tude means. Gratitude is a good one. So gratitude is like the state of being grateful, right? So beatitude would be like the state of being blessed, right? Roughly, yeah. So something like that, at least. And so you can always see too how the suffix and the meaning of the suffix can change over time, but that's vaguely what's going on with the name beatitude. So just, interesting little bit there. It's basically, beatitudes basically means the ones being made blessed or something like that, which is pretty accurate description of what these verses are about. So then verse 4, those who mourn are blessed, for they will be comforted. I still keep going back and forth between blessed and blessed. This verse is more along the lines of what I always assumed verse 1 was talking, well, actually verse 3, but the first beatitude was talking about. So, those who mourn are blessed, for they will be comforted. If the first one, to me at least, makes downright no sense, this one is only a tiny step farther. This one, I get what the statement is saying. Those who mourn will be comforted. Okay, I get that. But those who mourn are blessed. It still is kind of counterintuitive at first. But I think it's absolutely true. Like, I have absolutely no problems with that statement. Like, I don't think there's some kind of deeper meaning or anything here, really. I mean, there are deeper meanings, but, like, that I think is a true statement. Crazy as it might seem, I think that is a absolutely true statement. Not that the poor in spirit are blessed isn't a true statement, but the way I was reading it might not have been true. But anyways, I think this one literally means what it says, straight up, right? People who lose something, people who grieve for things that have been lost are blessed. And I think that is totally true. Why do I think that? I think there's, I will say, two main reasons why I really like this statement. The first is that the idea of mourning itself, I actually think mourning is a very... I don't see mourn as a negative word, right? To me, that is not a negative word. Because the fact that you are mourning something means that there was something worth mourning in the first place, right? And I think that's a great thing. This is getting very much into the philosophy of two of my favorite books, The Lord of the Rings and Fahrenheit 451. Fahrenheit 451, I absolutely love that book, and the whole idea that, you can't be too impassionate. Like, you can be too impassionate, right? Like, one of my favorite lines is when he's like, well, maybe it's time we did get, I think it was annoyed about something, like really bothered by something. And I think that's true. And I think that is kind of a problem in today's society. We are sort of trending towards where Fahrenheit 451 was warning us we might, and that is a world where people don't really care anymore, right? Like, apathy is very strong, I think, in today's modern world. And so, the idea that it's better to care and then lose that something and mourn it, I agree with that. I would go so far as to say, like, it's better to care about something and then get angry about it than to just not care and not get angry. I think the fine line is between what you do with that anger, right, and what exactly it is you're caring about. But so that's why. That's, from Fahrenheit 451, I think that's one of the reasons why mourning isn't a bad thing. In Lord of the Rings, one of my favorite lines from the films, I'm not sure if it's in the books, I think it is when Frodo and Gandalf and Bilbo and a bunch of other people climb the boat, the last boat leaving from, well, it's actually not the last boat, they thought it was, the last boat leaving from Middle-earth to Elvenholm across the sea. And Gandalf says, I will not tell you, do not grieve, for not all tears are evil. Right. And I think that's just another, that is talking about, sometimes it's good to cry. This is getting more into the physical aspect, I think, of mourning, and that, you can look it up too, like, it's pretty well held by most, like, scientists and people of intelligence and stuff, that, like, crying is a really healthy act, right, to help you get over something, right? And I also think Gandalf is also talking, though, in a spiritual sense, right, that as I said at the beginning, because you're mourning something, that means you cared about something, and mourning for something that is lost shows your appreciation for it. Mourning at a goodbye, like, I don't think that's a bad thing. The problem with mourning, I think, is when it goes on too long. That's almost always the problem with mourning, is just when it becomes an endless cycle of, like, you never get out of that low place and you're just constantly depressed, and yeah. And so that's why that second part is there. Those who mourn are blessed, for they will be comforted. I think you can take that in a lot of different ways. If you think about it, like, apply it to our normal physical life, I think it is something. I think that's one of those things that I don't know if I've ever really thought about before, but the idea that trying to figure out how to parse this. What he's talking about, if you apply it to, like, our normal life, is that you can kind of imagine the image of somebody who's going through a really hard thing, and because they're comforted by others around them, it actually becomes a powerful, like, bonding experience and helps them all to grow, right? You can imagine that. I don't think that's all he's talking about. I think more importantly, he's really talking, I think, about being comforted in a larger, more spiritual sense, like, by God and by the Spirit, right? I think kind of the large theme of what he's meaning there is, those who mourn are blessed because in the end there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? In the end, good will win. In the end, all that was lost will be restored, right? And that's the meaning there, is that if you lose things now, it's okay, because it'll be restored one day, And I think that is an awesome message. Let's go ahead and do verse 5, and then we might call it a day because it's kind of getting late. The gentle are blessed, for they will inherit the earth. Okay. this one, you will see that consistently every single one of the Beatitudes is very counter-culture and counter, at first glance, typical thinking, right? They don't seem to make sense. If just a quick pass, right? And this one as well. The gentle are blessed, for they will inherit the earth. Because if you know your history, you will know that like 99% of the time, it is not the gentle people who end up in positions of power, who end up with influence and with land and controlling the earth, right? But that's not what he's talking about. And this one, I think out of all of the Beatitudes, is the one that is most especially talking about heaven, right? And the second coming, I think, is this idea that it's almost all of these have a similar theme of, if you have a bad life now, and if you humble yourself in this life, you'll get good things later, and you'll be exalted in heaven. That is pretty consistently the theme in all of these. I think in some of them, there's also a secondary theme of, like, this applies to regular life as well, right? You know, you can see in regular life how being humble can lead to exaltation. Like, I mean, I can't speak from experience necessarily, but, like, being humble in a workspace will probably lead to good things later on for you in that work, in that job, right? You know, and you can see that physically, you know, in a more immediate sense with the mourning and being comforted. This one is probably one of the only ones where I'm not really sure how this would apply to regular life, or not regular life. That makes it sound like heaven isn't real or something. To immediate physical life. Like, I'm not exactly sure how the gentle inherit the earth in the here and now. I wonder how our Greek interlinear translates this one. Blessed are, okay, same. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Oh, it used humble instead of gentle. Interesting. And I think that actually makes even more sense to me. Because you will find, yes, I think gentle is easier to understand because gentle is a way we normally describe people, and gentle, I think, is also more outward. Like, you're outwardly gentle, right? You're outwardly gentle. I think you're inwardly meek or humble. So that's kind of, I think, why gentle is easier to understand. I think humble is the right definition because it is more about the internal than the external. I mean, like, we are getting into fine lines of semantics here, right? And it depends on translation and on personal opinion. I think that would be the difference I would put it as. That's not necessarily facts, though. Like, you can definitely be gentle in heart or, like, gentle in spirit, I guess. But it's easier to imagine gentle. Like, it's easier to imagine someone acting gentle externally, like, you know, not rushing into things, not being exuberant, not being too explosive and destroying things, instead, you know, being careful and stuff. It's harder to imagine someone, like, being humble externally. Like, what does that even look like? So, I think they're both fine definitions. I think humble makes a little more sense to me in this context, because this is almost, once again, almost a direct one-to-one for that passage that I've brought up more than once, where Jesus says, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who are humbled will inherit the earth. I think that is in a final sense, as in heaven. Right, they will have an inheritance in heaven, but I think that is also applies. Submissive is another good one, actually. Submissive is really good. I would say to a quite a large degree, being humble is being submissive to God, right? That is definitely one way you could, like, that's one of the main aspects of humility. So I think submissive is actually a great definition, except, as you pointed out, sometimes submissive has a negative connotation in our world, kind of, right? Because, and even as Christians, you don't want to be submissive to the world, as you said, right? You don't want to just let people walk all over you and just do whatever they tell you, even if it's something wrong or evil, right? It's not that kind of submissive, right? Submissive to God. Okay. And I think it is even submissive to other people to an extent, right? It's, you will let people get their way, and you will sometimes, and you will let, you will obey other people. I think that is a strong attribute of a Christian, is that they're willing to obey when people ask them to. They're willing to submit to others. But it's to a degree, right? And it's to a degree, and it's in the situations, and depending on what they're asking you to do, and so. All right. Let's do verse 6, because I really like verse 6. This is probably my favorite out of the Beatitudes. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be filled. And this, to me, I love this verse. I just love this verse because I love it for a lot of different reasons. For one reason is because I think it, once again, this is one that just, this is a truth that I think people don't always understand, and it's a truth that, like, I can see. And, I don't know. Like, not that these aren't all true, but this one I think is, like, especially strong to me. Another reason I really like this one is because there's something of a promise in that one. I think a little bit more so than the other. The other ones are promises too, right? If you're this, you'll be blessed. This one, I guess, to me, it's a promise of, like, if you're seeking for God and if you're trying to find righteousness, you will be filled. And, like, that's a great feeling, right? Because for me, at least, because, like, I think that's one of those things that, like, I do feel, like, out of all of the things in this passage, I guess, the one that I think I'm losing the word. The one I think I relate to the most is hunger and thirsting for righteousness, right? And so, and so that might not be for everybody, but to me, that verse is like a great promise that I cling to. For some people, it might be they feel like they are gentle and humble, right? And so that is strong to them, or they feel humble in spirit or poor in spirit, or they feel like peacemakers, or they have been persecuted because of Jesus. And I think that's a cool thing about the Beatitudes is they apply to different people. And I think, yeah. But what is this one talking about? This might be the only one that, I guess, the way this one is still somewhat counterculture is that you would assume, I think the people of that time, right, the Jewish leaders, I don't think you would necessarily describe them as hunger and thirsting for righteousness. You would think that they had righteousness, and they think they have righteousness. They aren't hungering and thirsting for that, right? And so because of that, they're always going to sit at this even stasis of not being filled and not being quite hungry either, right? It's this lukewarm kind of thing. And so that's how this one is still counterculture, is like, sometimes you have to look back and realize that, like, there really is, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. The word righteousness is interesting. It's a word that I'm not exactly sure how to define, to be honest, but I think the definition would be being right. Like, being right as in, like, being, like, doing the right thing, like, that kind of right, like, the way we use it in that phrase. Or, like, also being right before God is the way I've heard it phrased, and I like that, too. Not being right as in, like, I'm always right, because I'm a smarty pants. Not like that. But, so, those who hunger and thirst to do the right thing, right, to be right, are blessed, for they will be filled. And I think something to always remember is to always make sure you're doing things for the right reasons, and you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. And so, I guess you might ask the question, well, how do I know what is right? How do I know what is righteousness? I feel like that could have been a perfect segue into, like, the book of Romans, because Paul, I think he literally says, like, and righteousness is revealed through the something. I don't remember exactly what he says, but he talks about righteousness so much. So, when we get to Romans, we will dive more into that. But the brief answer, how do you know what is right, is, well, that's what we've got the Bible for, so that's what we're doing here, to a degree. But I think also your conscience to a degree, and the Holy Spirit to a much larger degree. I think all of us kind of have a basic idea of, like, we know what's right to do. We sometimes just forget about it. Or it's not even that we forget, it's that, like, we purposely forget, like, we just kind of ignore it for a minute. Good questions on the difference between people saying justice and mean revenge. Yes. Oh, yes. Justice, righteousness, and revenge get flipped around very often. I think justice is kind of the middle word between righteousness and revenge, where someone can say justice and, like, they can say, like, justification, right? Or being just and mean righteousness. And then they can also say justice and actually mean revenge or validation or vindication even, or something like that, as you're saying. This is something I'm writing a book with starting, like, very rough, like, just now planning it out. A book with a, like, revenge plotline, right? And that was something that I've also watched a really good video by, I think it was Tail Foundry, about revenge. And that was something that I noticed, is that a lot of time people use the word justice, and really they just mean revenge. Like, justice for me because it's what I think is right and it'll make me feel better. What does justice mean? Kind of has two definitions. One is, like, what the law says, but the more, like, the philosophical definition would be, I think it's very similar. I think justice is getting what is right, if that makes sense. Like, justice is almost always, like, either punishments or rewards, right? So justice is, like, getting what is right, right? And righteousness, I would say, is doing and being what is right, and then justice is getting what is right. That's how I would define those. I'm not sure if I'm, like, totally sold on those definitions. As I said, Romans talks about justice too. It talks about justification as well, which is, like, the same root word. So Romans talks about all this is a lot. Matching life with God's commands, will, and purpose. Yep. I think that's a really good and simple explanation of righteousness. Fairness, yes. I think justice is I think fairness is, like, justice in the largest, most, like, the largest, most, like, ephemeral sense. Like, fairness is, like, when the world is just, right? Something is fair when, like, the world is just, in that sense, right? It doesn't always have to be that way, like, you know. But anyways, I think we'll pause there. this has been a fun discussion, but as I said, I do have other plans for the rest of the night. And we've already dragged on, an hour and 7 minutes. Woohoo! So, I will see you all next week. We will go live probably sometime between 8 and 8:15. Once again, that's the usual time. I hope to see you all next week. We will continue with this. We'll probably do a quick reread of verses 1 through 6, and then we'll do 7 through 12, and we might do a little bit farther. But yeah. I will also probably read up on the first couple verses and reread them like the day before maybe, because I'm still like, not that I'm not sold with what we've like come to agree on. I just feel like I don't really have a deep understanding of those first 3 verses. Like I'm not, or first 4 actually, like verses 3, 4, 5, and 6, 3, 4, and 5 especially. I'm not totally like I feel like there's a lot more that could be said, and I just wasn't grasping those first couple verses that well. So we will talk about that next week. Thank you all for sticking through with me. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. I do ramble a lot on the specifics of, language and words and things like that, but as I said at the beginning, that's kind of what we're here for. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, God bless.